What if I told you that you might be training all wrong? You're putting in the effort, but without the right approach, you're wasting both time and energy. In this video, we're gonna break down the key training principles, which is the second of the 3 building blocks that I believe drive the success of the world's strongest athletes. In the last video, I covered the mindset and the discipline, so if you haven't watched it yet, do it now, because without a solid mental foundation, even the best training principles won't take you far. Check it out, link in the description. But before jumping to the real thing, let's quickly answer one important question. What is a progression? You can think of a progression as a way to actually make a skill or exercise easier or harder in order to help you build strength, endurance and control. And of course, there are a ton of ways to do that. So for static holds, like for example the planche and the front lever, one of the most common ways is by adjusting the body length. And in fact, the longer the body is, the more weight should be shifted far away from the weight center, which actually makes the skill harder compared to, for example, shorter body positions where you don't need to lean that much. You can, for example, see here the difference between the lean in the full planche and the advanced planche. But of course, there are also some other ways, such as by using an external support, by, for example, a resistance band that usually we position around the level of the weight center, or you can get a help from your training partner. And in fact, this can also work in reverse, when instead of using additional support, you add extra weight. And for repetitions-based exercises and skills, the progressions can include inclined body positions, partial repetitions, and different speed of reps execution. And guys, that is just a simple explanation of what is a progression. And why we needed that? Because right now we're going to this circle that I want you to focus on, and imagine that it represents all the progressions of a single skill or exercise. That can be anything from push-up to a planche. The closer you are to the center, the easier the progression is. And the outer edge is your end goal. And this is your safe zone, including all the progressions that you can currently do. You can think of it like a video game map in which this is the visible and the explored area. And your goal is to conquer more and more from that outer space. But here is the catch. The more you go to that outer space, the bigger the intensity becomes, and the more you need to sacrifice 2 key metrics: quality and volume. The quality is how well a skill or exercise is executed, and the volume can be the hold time for static holds or the number of repetitions for repetitions-based exercise and skills. Now, when I train, I often see 2 groups of people. Group 1 are the perfectionists who, instead of pushing to the new territories and exploring more advanced progressions, they're staying in their comfort zone, refining their form, increasing their volume, and hoping that one day their 40, 50, 60 seconds of a tuck planche will magically turn into a full planche. Well, guess what? You might become the world champion in the tuck planche, but you'll never reach your ultimate goal. And one of the reasons is because even if the progressions are pretty similar, they have slightly different muscle activation. And that mostly applies to the progressions that are based on the different length of the body. So it's absolutely possible that you outperform somebody in an easier progression, but he might still beat you in harder. For example, back in 2014, I had one of the best straddle planches in competitions, and there were some guys that were having weaker straddle planche than me, but also stronger full planche than me. Why? Because I wasn't pushing into that new territory and was fully counting on my straddle planche to make me the strongest plancher in the world. And that's exactly what held me back. But of course, don't get me wrong, not all exercises has that big difference in the mind muscle activation between the different progressions. For example, doing a pull-up with a resistance band has a pretty similar activation pattern as the regular pull-up. And sticking to the same band that, let's say, allows you to go for 30 reps is great in terms of reducing the risk of injury and refining your form, but when it's about strength development, it's not the best choice just because we have big volume with low intensity. And now don't even need to mention the boredom of doing the same thing again and again. And you see how things move so fast nowadays, and people want to see how everything happens quickly. So many people hit the plateau not only physically but also mentally, just because they stick to the same progressions for months, counting on that progression to lead them to the next ones without even trying them. And now you're gonna say, okay bro, but I already have 10-15 seconds of advanced planche and I still see no progress in my full planche. Well, congratulations, you're part of the second group, which in the fitness industry is usually called the ego lifters. These are usually those who skip the regular progressions and go directly to the far unknown zone. And the problem is that the jump is too big and you need to sacrifice way too much quality, volume, or in most cases, both. For example, if your form is a complete shit and you're so far away from the proper technique, then the skill that you're currently doing is already a different skill from the one that you're trying to reach. And even if you have the best technique ever, but I couldn't see it just because I blinked one time, and you have close to 0 seconds hold, then it will still not serve you just because you don't have the minimum physical time to actually apply that mind-muscle connection. As I said, the more out you go in that circle, the more quality and volume will drop. When it's about the form, you can go for 60, 70, 80% of the good form, but of course that is pretty subjective. I mean, how you can explain it with percentage. But let's say like this planche is perfect, this planche is fine, and this one is trash. So you can see how it's totally fine not to have the perfect form when entering a new progression. And a good approach when entering a new progression is to actually start working on the volume. Let's say in the beginning you're not gonna have both quality and volume on a high level, so keep the same quality and start working on the volume. Once you have enough, then you can think of working on your form, which of course will drop the volume. Then you can again work on the volume and repeat multiple times. Then after that you can think of going to the next progression, and it will be totally fine not to be perfect, you just need to repeat the same thing. But always make sure that you don't go for a progression that is too far away from your zone, because then fixing the form will be too hard. And when progressing from one to another progression, it's really important to go with a pace that matches your own capabilities. And everybody has their own rate of progress. For example, you know, some lighter can go really fast from progression to progression, they can even skip some progressions, while others who are, you know, let's say heavier, taller, not that genetically gifted, they need to go to way more progressions and stay at some specific progressions for a longer time. And in fact, majority of the calisthenics tutorials, they offer you this as a solution. This is a typical solution for planche. We have tuck planche, we have advanced tuck, we have straddle and full planche. Yeah, but let's be honest, for majority of the people, big mass of them, this is pretty hard. That's why some people need to break it down into even more mini progressions. You can see over here that you can add as many as you want mini progressions. For example, if the transition between the tuck and advanced tuck is too hard, then go for half advanced tuck. You can go for as many mini progressions as needed. If it's still too hard, then you can add a band. Just follow your own pace of progress and work regardless of how slow it is. Another tip that is more about the static holds is, before going to a specific progression, to actually make a transition from a progression that you can currently do to the one that you're aiming, then going back and repeating multiple times, and that in fact will help you develop strength and mind-muscle connection. Now let's talk about something important. To apply these strategies effectively, you must first put aside your ego. And this applies to the two groups. The first group are the perfectionists who just don't go to the next progression because they feel that it will not be perfect. And that was exactly my case, you know, as being known for a long time as one of the strongest planchers in the world, I felt obligated all my attempts to be just perfect. And in fact, that is something that held me back. And then the other group are those people who don't respect the form and hold at all. You know, for them, it's important just to be resembling a hold, even if it's not there yet. And those people usually refuse to admit that they're not ready for a certain progression and that they need to go a few steps back to build on the foundations. So yeah, you can see how both of the groups are struggling with the progress, but in fact the second group is having more risk of an injury just because they're pushing through progressions that they're not ready for. Next topic is mind versus emotions. And some people say that you should train based on feelings, but I'll definitely argue that you should only rely on feelings. For example, we often get overly motivated from outside factors, such as our training partner who is hyping us, or let's say seeing elite athletes who are effortlessly performing at a high level, which can sometimes lead to situations in which we are pushing beyond our limits. And also from a logical standpoint, if on the last training you were performing on 100% and let's say you did 10 repetitions, it's just logical that the next training you won't be capable of doing 25 repetitions. Maybe somebody will progress faster than you, but as I said, you should always follow your own speed. And most of the time you already know it from previous experiences. So yeah guys, I hope this video was helpful. Of course there's so many other things to cover, as for example specific skill techniques, but these are the basic foundations that you need to know for now. And in fact all that is implemented in one tool on which I was working pretty actively the last 6-7 months, and that tool will help you progress like nothing else. Yeah, but more about that next week, next Thursday, when I'll be covering the third building block to your path to success, which is the practice. And if you still haven't watched the video about the first building block, do it now, link in the description. As always, let me know your thoughts in the comment section, I'm reading them all. Subscribe to the channel for more videos and see you soon.